There is something they never told you. Not your mother, not your best friend. Not the self-help books that lined your shelf and promised you that if you just loved yourself enough, if you just communicated clearly enough, if you just showed up fully enough, he would see you, he would choose you, he would stay. But he didn't. Or he did, and something still felt wrong. Like you were holding your breath. Like you were performing instead of living. Like the woman standing in that relationship was somehow less than the woman you were before it began. Here is the question no one dares to ask you directly. What if the way you were taught to love is the very thing destroying your power? Think about it. You were taught to be available, to be warm, to be easy to be with, easy to understand, easy to keep happy. You were taught that a good woman meets him halfway. No, more than halfway. That expressing your feelings is healthy, that chasing what you want is strength, that needing nothing makes you low maintenance and low maintenance is desirable. And yet, the women who seem to effortlessly have what you want, the devotion, the pursuit, the electric tension, are rarely the ones doing all the right things. They are not always the most beautiful. They are not always the most emotionally available. They are not always trying. They are something else entirely. There is a quality, ancient, instinctual, almost impossible to fake, that lives inside every woman before the world teaches her to abandon it. It is not cruelty. It is not manipulation. It is not playing games. It is power, quiet, magnetic, unhurried power. And somewhere between your first heartbreak and your last apology for wanting too much, you gave it away. This book is not a guide to becoming someone you are not. It is a map back to who you were before you started shrinking, before you started over-explaining, before you started watching your phone and manufacturing reasons why he hasn't responded. But I have to warn you, what you are about to read will be uncomfortable, because reclaiming power means confronting the ways you voluntarily surrendered it. And that confrontation is never painless. By the end of this book, you will see something you cannot unsee. The only question is, are you ready to look? Chapter 1. The woman you buried to be loved. You didn't lose yourself all at once. That's the part no one tells you. There was no single catastrophic moment where you handed over your power and walked away empty. It didn't happen like a robbery. Sudden, violent, impossible to miss. It happened the way fog moves, so slowly, so quietly, so naturally, that by the time you noticed you couldn't see clearly anymore, you had already forgotten what clear looked like. Think back, not to your last relationship or your worst heartbreak. Go further back than that. Think back to the first time you made yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Maybe you were 7. Maybe you were 17. Maybe it was a parent who needed you to be easier. Maybe it was a friend who needed you to be less loud, less opinionated, less much. Maybe it was a boy who looked at you like you were almost perfect, and that almost quietly became a project you devoted years to completing. Do you remember the first time you swallowed something true so that the room could stay peaceful? You probably don't, because by the time most women reach adulthood, swallowing truth is no longer a conscious act. It has become reflex, an automated function running silently in the background of every interaction. You don't even feel it anymore. That is precisely the problem. Here is what I want you to sit with. Really sit with, not read past. The woman you are today is not the full version of who you are. She is the approved version, the edited version, the version that learned, through years of social feedback, which parts of herself were safe to show and which parts needed to be tucked away before anyone important noticed them. And the terrifying thing is, she is so convincing that even you believe she is real. You believe she is your personality, when she is actually your survival strategy. There is a difference, and learning to feel that difference is going to be one of the most uncomfortable things you do. Let me describe something to you, and I want you to notice what happens in your body as you read it. A woman meets someone she is genuinely excited about. He is interesting, attentive, different from the others. In the first weeks, she is herself, fully, freely, without self-censorship. She laughs too loudly. She has strong opinions. She is busy with her own life. She doesn't respond immediately to every message because she is genuinely occupied with her own thoughts, her own projects, her own world. And he is captivated. Then something shifts. She starts to like him more. The stakes feel higher, and very quietly, without even deciding to, She begins to adjust. She softens opinions that might create friction. She becomes more available than she actually feels. She starts editing her reactions in real time, asking herself, how will this land? Before she lets herself be honest. Oof. She gives more than she naturally would because she has unconsciously decided that her unedited self might be too much. She doesn't do this because she is weak. She does it because she is afraid. Because something deep inside her has learned that love is conditional and that conditions must be managed. He begins to feel it, though he could never articulate what it is. The woman who drew him in, the one with a world of her own, with edges and textures and a slight unpredictability, has been slowly replaced by someone focused almost entirely on him. And attention, when it becomes total, when it has no source beyond the object of its fixation, stops feeling like a gift. It starts feeling like pressure. She loves him harder. He becomes more distant. She reads his distance as a sign she hasn't given enough and gives more. He retreats further. She will spend months, maybe years, believing the problem is that she is not enough. The actual problem is the opposite. She became too available to a version of herself that was never fully her, and in doing so, made herself forgettable. But let's go deeper than relationships, because this is not just a love story. This is the story of your identity. The pattern I just described does not begin with romantic partners. It begins much earlier, in the first relationships that mattered, the ones where your emotional survival was genuinely at stake. The parent who was more comfortable with your compliance than your complexity. The environment that rewarded your silence and punished your fire. The message, delivered in 1,000 subtle ways, that your full self was inconvenient. So you learned to pre-edit. You learned to scan the room before speaking, to read faces before sharing feelings, to calculate the emotional cost of honesty, and decide, more often than not, that the price was too high. You became extraordinarily skilled at knowing what other people needed from you, and extraordinarily detached from knowing what you needed from yourself. This is not a character flaw. I need you to hear that clearly. It is a brilliant adaptation. It kept you connected to people you could not afford to lose. It kept the peace when peace meant survival. It made you readable, manageable, safe to be around. And in the context where you learned it, that safety was not a small thing. The problem is that adaptations don't know when to stop. The strategy that protected you at 9 is still running at 29. The pattern that helped you survive an emotionally unpredictable parent is now being applied to men who are simply human and imperfect and capable of handling your wholeness, if only you would let them encounter it. You are still managing a threat that no longer exists, and in doing so, you have become a woman who is profoundly skilled at being for other people and almost completely unpracticed at being for herself. Now here is where it gets darker. The woman you buried to be loved, the unedited one, the one with the sharp edges and the deep hunger and the opinions she never quite voices and the standard she keeps quietly lowering, she is still in there. She didn't disappear. She just went underground. She has been watching. She watches every time you say it's fine when it isn't. Every time you laugh off something that hurt you. Every time you make yourself smaller in a conversation, a room, a relationship. Every time you reach for your phone to send a message you know, somewhere beneath the anxiety, you should not send. She watches and she waits, because the self you suppress does not vanish. It calcifies. It becomes a weight you carry without acknowledging, a low hum of dissatisfaction beneath every interaction, a persistent sense that something is off even when everything looks fine from the outside. You might call it restlessness, or low-grade unhappiness, or the feeling that your relationships never quite reach the depth you know is possible, that you are always slightly performing, even in your most intimate moments. That feeling is her. She is not broken. She is not too much. She is not the problem you were trained to believe she was. She is the part of you that still knows what you actually want. And reclaiming her, all of her, not just the palatable parts, is the only journey worth taking. The question is whether you are ready to stop editing long enough to let her breathe. That answer will shape everything that follows. Chapter 2. The lies you were taught about strength. Someone lied to you. And the cruelest part is that they did it with the best intentions. They handed you a map and told you it was the path to power. They said, "Go after what you want. Never wait. Never need. Never show vulnerability." That is what strong women do, and you believe them. Why wouldn't? The message came from everywhere at once, from the women you admired, the culture you consumed, the voices that told you the old ways were weakness and the new ways were liberation. So you became the woman who initiates, who reaches out first, who makes things happen, who doesn't sit around waiting for anyone to choose her, because she is too evolved for that, too self-aware, too strong. And yet here you are, still feeling, somewhere beneath the performance of strength, like something isn't working. Like the more you do, the less you receive. Like the more you reach, the further things move. Like you are running a race with great form and tremendous effort, and somehow still falling behind. That is not a coincidence. That is a clue. Let's talk about what strength actually is. Because I think you've been sold a counterfeit version, and you've been carrying it so long it feels like your own skin. The modern idea of female strength in relationships looks, on the surface, like confidence. It says, I don't wait. I don't wonder. I go after what I want because I am not a passive participant in my own life. And in certain contexts, careers, creativity, ambition, this is not just valid, it is essential. A woman who knows what she wants and moves toward it is formidable. But relationships are not careers. Desire is not a boardroom. And the energy required to build something professionally is almost the exact opposite of the energy that allows romantic attraction to breathe. Here is what no one explained to you. In the economy of desire, pursuit and attraction move in opposite directions. When you chase, you signal that you are already sold. When you are already sold, there is nothing left to discover. When there is nothing left to discover, the tension, the electric, magnetic, almost painful tension that lives in the space between two people who both want and don't yet fully have, collapses. And with it, so does his sense of urgency. You were taught that initiating is power. But initiation, when it comes from anxiety rather than genuine desire, is not power. It is preemptive surrender dressed in the language of confidence. Can you feel the difference? I want you to be honest with yourself for a moment. And this requires the kind of honesty that is uncomfortable, the kind you usually skip past on the way to a more flattering explanation. When you reach out first, is it always because you genuinely want to? Or is it sometimes, often, because the silence is unbearable? Because not knowing feels worse than the possible disappointment of reaching out and receiving less than you hoped for? Because something feels better than the terrifying openness of waiting? When you make things easy for him, plan the dates, carry the conversation, offer reassurance he hasn't asked for, is it generosity? Or is it anxiety wearing the costume of generosity? When you tell yourself, I don't need anything from anyone, is that freedom? Or is it a wound so old, you've rebranded it as a personality trait? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the most important questions you will encounter in this book, because until you can tell the difference between a choice made from power and a choice made from fear, you will keep mistaking your coping mechanisms for your character. There is a particular kind of woman the modern world has produced. She is high-functioning, self-aware, emotionally intelligent. She has done the therapy, read the books, knows her attachment style. She says all the right things about not needing a man to complete her, about her own happiness being her responsibility, about not chasing what doesn't choose her. And then she spends 3 hours composing a casual-sounding text. She knows, intellectually, that she is over-invested. But the knowledge doesn't stop the behavior, because this is not an intelligence problem. It was never an intelligence problem. It is a nervous system problem, a wiring problem, a pattern so deeply embedded that it operates beneath the level of conscious decision. She is not weak. She is not foolish. See, she is a woman whose idea of strength was built on a foundation that was never meant to hold weight. And she has been white-knuckling that structure for years, wondering why it keeps cracking. The exhaustion you feel in certain relationships, that is the cost of maintenance. The cost of holding together a dynamic that requires your constant effort to exist. Real attraction doesn't feel like maintenance, it feels like gravity. Now here is the darker layer. The one that requires you to stay with me. The lie about strength is not just about tactics. It is not simply a dating strategy error you can correct by texting less or waiting longer to respond. It goes much deeper than that. It is about what you were taught to value in yourself and what you were taught to suppress. You were taught to value your output, your usefulness. Your ability to make things happen, to hold things together, to be capable and competent and self-sufficient. These are wonderful qualities, but they are qualities of doing. And somewhere in the relentless cultivation of your doing, your being was quietly neglected. Your being, the part of you that is magnetic, simply by existing. The part that doesn't need to perform or produce or pursue to be worthy of desire. The part that is soft, not because it is weak, but because softness, real softness, requires a security that is almost terrifyingly rare. You were taught that softness is vulnerability and vulnerability is danger. So you armored yourself in capability, in independence, and I don't need anything. And that armor, so carefully constructed, so socially praised, so genuinely useful in so many areas of your life, that armor became the very thing standing between you and the depth of connection you have been aching for. Because no one can reach a woman in armor. Not really. They can admire the armor. They can respect it. They can be impressed by it. But they cannot touch it. And at some point, being admired from a distance starts to feel exactly like being alone. The strength they sold you keeps you safe. I won't pretend otherwise. It is efficient and clean, and it means you rarely have to feel the specific agony of wanting something you cannot control. But it also keeps you surface, always impressive, always capable. Rarely, if ever truly met, there is a version of you that is not performing strength, that is not initiating from anxiety or giving from fear or staying independent to avoid the risk of needing someone who might not stay. That version is quieter, less immediately impressive. She does not reach, she radiates, she does not chase, she draws, she is not a fantasy. She is not an impossible ideal, she is the woman underneath the armor. You have been told her softness is weakness for so long that you can barely remember what she feels like, but she is there, and she is waiting for you to stop being so impressively strong that you never let anyone close enough to matter. The question that should be sitting uncomfortably in your chest right now is not how do I become her? It is, what have I been so afraid of that I buried her this deep? Chapter 3. Why he stopped pursuing you, and it wasn't what you think. He didn't stop because you weren't enough. That is the story you told yourself. The one you have been quietly carrying, folding into your chest like something too fragile and too shameful to leave out in the open. The story that says, if I had been more beautiful, more relaxed, less needy, less intense, more fun, less broken, he would have stayed. He would have kept coming. He would have looked at you the way he looked at you in the beginning, with that particular quality of attention that made you feel, for the first time in a long time, like you were worth looking at. But that story, as deeply as you feel it, is wrong. Not wrong in the way that lets you off the hook entirely. Wrong in a way that is more complicated, more instructive, and ultimately more useful. If you are willing to sit with the discomfort of it long enough to understand what it is actually telling you, he didn't stop pursuing you because of what you are. He stopped pursuing you because of what happened to the dynamic between you. And those two things are not the same. Confusing them has cost you more than you know. Let's go back to the beginning. Not your beginning with him, further back, to something ancient and instinctual that lives in the architecture of desire itself. Pursuit, at its psychological root, is activated by a particular combination of two forces, genuine interest and unresolved uncertainty. Both must be present. Remove either one and the mechanism stops. Interest without uncertainty becomes comfort. Warm, pleasant, entirely devoid of the electric charge that makes someone reach for their phone at midnight just to feel closer to you. Uncertainty without interest becomes anxiety. The kind that makes a person pull away entirely, the sweet spot. The precise emotional temperature where pursuit thrives is when a man is genuinely drawn to a woman and simultaneously aware, on some level he may not be able to articulate, that she is not yet fully his. That there is still something to discover, still something to earn, still a version of her he hasn't reached yet. That awareness doesn't require games, doesn't require cruelty or manufactured distance, or pretending you don't care when you do. It requires something far simpler and far harder. A woman who is genuinely invested in her own life, her own standards, her own inner world, so fully that even in her presence, even when she is right in front of him, he senses there are depths he has not yet reached. That is what pulls a man forward. And the tragic irony is this: the moment you started liking him more, you started dismantling exactly that. Think about the early weeks, the ones that felt effortless. You were busy, you were genuinely yourself. You responded to his messages when you got to them, not the second they arrived, because your life was full and your attention was distributed across your own world. You laughed easily, disagreed sometimes, had opinions you didn't soften. You were present, but not consumed. He pursued. Then something shifted in you. The feeling deepened, the stakes got higher, and without consciously deciding to, you began collapsing the very space that had made you magnetic. You became more available, not because your schedule changed, but because he had moved to the center of your attention, and everything else had quietly moved to the edges. You became more agreeable, not because your opinions changed, but because the fear of creating friction had become louder than your own voice. You became more transparent, texting what you were feeling before you had fully felt it, sharing before there was anything left to discover, answering questions he hadn't asked yet because the silence felt dangerous. You closed the distance, and closing the distance, when done prematurely, is not intimacy. It is the removal of possibility, and possibility is the oxygen that keeps desire alive. He didn't become less attracted to you, he became less activated. There is a difference. One is about your worth. The other is about the chemistry of a dynamic that you both, unknowingly, had a hand in changing. Now here's where I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that will be hardest to hear. Some of what collapsed that dynamic was him. His emotional unavailability, his inability to communicate, his own wounds and walls and patterns he hadn't yet examined. I am not asking you to absorb all the weight of what didn't work. That would not be truth. It would be another kind of distortion. But some of what collapsed it was you. And that part, your part, is the only part you have any power over. So that is where we must look. The specific behaviors that suffocate male pursuit are almost never the dramatic ones. They are not the big arguments or the tearful confrontations or the moments of obvious need. Those are visible, those can be navigated. The quiet killers are subtler. They are the double text sent 40 minutes after the first, not because anything changed, but because the silence felt unbearable. The reassurance sought constantly, dressed as casual conversation. The way your energy in his presence shifted from a woman with her own gravity to a woman whose gravity had merged entirely with his. Which means when he moved, you moved and he could feel it. And it made him feel not chosen but responsible. There is something deeply uncomfortable that happens when a man realizes a woman's emotional equilibrium depends heavily on him. Even men who want to be important to a woman, who genuinely desire to matter, can feel the difference between being chosen and being needed as a lifeline. One makes them feel significant, the other makes them feel trapped, and a trapped man does not pursue. A trapped man manages, distances, pulls back just enough to breathe, and you felt that pulling back and read it as rejection. So you moved closer, and the cycle tightened. This is the loop that ends relationships not with a single catastrophic break, but with a long, slow, heartbreaking fade, where two people who genuinely cared about each other find themselves strangers. Not because love wasn't real, but because the dynamic became unsustainable in ways neither of them had the language to name. You kept giving more of what wasn't working. He kept retreating from something he couldn't explain. And somewhere in the middle of that loop, the version of you he was originally drawn to, the one with her own orbit, her own weather, her own mystery, quietly disappeared. Not because she left, but because anxiety replaced her, slowly and completely, until even you had forgotten she was ever there. I want you to understand something, and I want you to let it land before you defend against it. The pursuit didn't stop because you loved too much. Loving deeply is not the problem. It was never the problem. The problem is that somewhere in the loving, you stopped being someone and started being for someone. And a woman who is entirely for someone, who has reorganized her inner world around another person's presence, is not a woman he can pursue. Because you cannot pursue what is already completely yours. You made yourself too available to a future that hadn't been offered yet. You moved in emotionally before he had decided he wanted a roommate. And the space you occupied, the one that should have remained yours, that should have stayed full with your own life, your own desires, your own becoming, you left it empty for him to fill. And he felt that emptiness not as an invitation, but as a weight. This is not a comfortable chapter to have read, I know that. Because it means that some of what you blamed on him lies, at least in part, in your own patterns. In the way anxiety disguises itself as love, and then behaves in every way that love would never actually behave. In the way the wound you carry, the one that says, "I must secure this before it leaves," drives decisions that create the very outcome it is desperate to avoid. You are not broken. You are not unlovable. You are not too much. You are a woman who learned to love from a place of fear, and fear-based love, no matter how genuine the feeling beneath it, behaves in ways that push away the very thing it is reaching for. The question sitting at the center of all of this, the one you will carry into every chapter that follows, is not why did he stop pursuing me? It is, what would it feel like to be a woman who never needed him to pursue her to feel whole? And how differently would everything have unfolded then? Sit with that. Really sit with it. Because the answer to that question is the beginning of everything. Chapter 4. The Invisible Currency of Mystery. You thought you were building intimacy. That is the part that makes this so difficult to look at directly. Because everything you did, the long conversations that stretch past midnight, the feelings shared before they were fully formed, the constant texting, the emotional availability that had no off switch, the radical transparency you had been told, was the foundation of real connection. All of it came from a genuine place. You were not performing. You were not being reckless. You were doing what you believed closeness required. And in doing it, you drained the very thing you were trying to protect. This is the cruelty of a truth no one prepares you for. Intimacy and desire, while not opposites, do not always move in the same direction. You can build one while quietly, invisibly dismantling the other. And the tragedy is that by the time most women notice the erosion, they have already spent months, sometimes years, confused about why someone who clearly cares for them seems to want them less and less. It was not the caring that was the problem. It was the completeness. Let me explain what I mean by that, because this is not a simple idea, and it deserves to be handled carefully. There is a particular quality that lives in the early stages of attraction, a quality so specific, so electrically distinct, that every person on earth recognizes it even if they have never had language for it. It is the feeling of almost, of not quite yet, of being drawn towards something you can sense but cannot fully see. It lives in the space between two people, before that space has been entirely collapsed, in the pauses, the unreturned glances, the conversations that end just before you've said everything, the texts that leave something unresolved, the presence of a woman who is here but is also, unmistakably, somewhere else. That quality is not manufactured distance. It is not a tactic. It is the natural atmosphere created by a person who has an interior world so full, so genuinely occupied, that even in moments of connection, they cannot be entirely reached. And it is the most magnetic force in the architecture of desire. The word for it is mystery, but not the cheap version of that word, not the performative withholding, not the calculated silence designed to create anxiety, not the game playing that passes for strategy in bad dating advice. Real mystery is not something you do. It is something you are, or more precisely, something you have not yet allowed yourself to stop being. Because here is what happens when you over-explain. When you overshare, when you offer your interior world up completely, without pause, without filter, without the natural restraint of a woman who trusts that what is worth knowing about her will reveal itself in time. You hand him the book before he has had the chance to want to read it. Think about the last time you were completely captivated by something. A film that gripped you. A piece of music that reached somewhere inside you. A person who made you think about them long after the conversation ended. Now ask yourself what those things had in common. They did not give you everything at once. They revealed, then withheld, then revealed a little more. But not all of it, not yet. They maintained a productive incompleteness that kept you leaning forward, kept you returning, kept you invested in what might be coming next. The withholding was not cruel. It was structural. It was the architecture of sustained attention. This is not a metaphor. This is psychology. The human brain is wired to be most engaged, not by what it has fully received, but by what it is still in the process of reaching for. Desire, romantic intellectual, aesthetic, lives in the lean. It lives in the almost. The moment something is fully possessed, fully understood, fully available without friction or mystery, the brain's engagement drops. Not because the thing has become less valuable, but because the mechanism that drives pursuit, that extraordinary engine of longing, has nothing left to run on. You were taught that full transparency is the path to real intimacy, and in some contexts it is. But in the specific, delicate ecosystem of early attraction and sustained desire, relentless transparency does not create depth. It creates flatness, a landscape with no shadows. And you cannot find mystery in a landscape with no shadows, no matter how beautiful the light. I want you to recognize something now, something you may not have seen clearly before. The moments in your past relationships where the energy was most alive, where he was most attentive, most present, most visibly pulled toward you, were almost certainly not the moments of maximum emotional openness. They were the moments when you were occupied, when you were so genuinely involved in something of your own that you were, briefly, slightly unreachable. When you responded to his message hours later, not as a strategy but simply because you forgot, because your life was full enough to make forgetting possible. In those moments, something shifted in him. You probably noticed it without understanding it. A particular quality of attention that felt different. A responsiveness that had more urgency in it. A warmth that seemed inexplicably to have increased precisely in proportion to how unavailable you had briefly become. That was not a coincidence. That was desire responding to its native environment. And then you noticed him noticing you, and the anxiety of possibly losing it made you collapse the very space that had created it. You reached toward the warmth just as you had reached every time before, and in reaching, you cooled it. You have done this more times than you realize. Here is where it gets uncomfortable in a different way. The oversharing, the constant communication, the emotional transparency turned all the way up. These are not just habits. For most women, they are anxiety management strategies that have been socially reframed as healthy relationship behaviors. When you share a feeling before it is fully formed, you are not always seeking connection. Sometimes you are seeking relief from the discomfort of holding something uncertain inside yourself. When you text twice without a response, you are not always expressing genuine desire. Sometimes you are trying to close a loop that your nervous system cannot tolerate leaving open. When you explain yourself at length, your motives, your feelings, your intentions, you are not always building understanding. Sometimes you are preemptively defending against a rejection that exists only in your imagination. This is not intimacy. This is anxiety, performing as intimacy. And the distinction matters enormously, because one of them builds connection and the other slowly, steadily consumes the very oxygen that connection needs to survive. The person on the receiving end of it, even if they love you, even if they are not consciously aware of what they are experiencing, begins to feel a particular kind of emotional weight. Not because your feelings are too much, but because feelings that arrive faster than the relationship has created space for them create pressure. And people, when they feel pressured, do not move toward the source of pressure. They step back. They create space instinctively. The way a body moves away from something too loud, too bright, too much too soon. He wasn't retreating from you. He was retreating from the pressure. But because you experienced it as retreat, your anxiety escalated. And because your anxiety escalated, the sharing intensified, and the loop tightened further. Mystery, real mystery, is what breaks that loop, not by withholding your feelings, but by being so genuinely full of your own life that your feelings have somewhere to live besides the surface of your relationship. Not by going silent to create effect, but by having so much internal richness that silence is not empty but inhabited. Not by being hard to read, but by being so layered, so genuinely complex, so invested in your own becoming that there is always something new to discover. A woman like that does not overshare because she does not need to. She is not managing anxiety through transparency, because her inner world is stable enough to hold uncertainty without immediately exporting it. She does not explain herself at length because she trusts, truly trusts, that what she is worth knowing will reveal itself in time, and that the revelation itself is part of the gift. She is not a closed book. She is an unfolding one. And there is no more irresistible thing in the world than a story that keeps revealing new layers every time you think you have reached the end. The question this chapter leaves you with is not, how do I become more mysterious? That framing will take you in the wrong direction. Mystery cannot be constructed from the outside. It cannot be performed into existence. It is the natural exhale of a woman who is genuinely, deeply, unapologetically invested in herself. So the real question, the one worth carrying forward, is this. What would your life look like if you were so fully occupied with your own becoming that you simply did not have the space to overgive, over-explain, or overreach? And perhaps even more confronting than that, what are you so afraid of finding in that space, the one you keep filling with other people, that you have never allowed yourself to simply be still inside it? That is where the mystery lives, not in what you withhold from him, in what you have not yet discovered about yourself. Chapter 5. The Anxious Pursuer, a portrait you'll recognize. She is not who you think she is. She is not the desperate woman you have seen in films, the one who cries too openly, who begs, who cannot hide the rawness of her need. She is not obvious. She is not, by any visible measure, someone who appears to be struggling. She is put together. She is self-aware. She has read the books and done the work and can articulate her attachment style with impressive precision over a glass of wine with her friends. And then she goes home and checks her phone for the 14th time in an hour. This is the woman I need you to meet. Not because she is a cautionary tale. Not because she is broken or pitiable or beyond repair, but because she is, in some form, in some degree, recognizable to almost every woman who has ever loved someone and been terrified, in that quiet, relentless, bone-deep way of what it would mean to lose them. She might be you. She is probably in some chapter of your life, someone you have been. And the only way out of the pattern is to see it clearly first, without flinching, without immediately reaching for a more flattering interpretation. So let's look. The anxious pursuer does not wake up and decide to overfunction. That is the first thing you need to understand. There is no conscious strategy. There is no moment where she thinks, I will now send 3 texts in quick succession and then apologize for all of them. The behavior is not chosen. It is tricked. It arises from a nervous system that learned a very long time ago that connection is unstable, that the people who matter have a tendency to disappear, to withdraw, to become emotionally unavailable without warning, and that the only way to prevent that disappearance is through effort, constant, vigilant, exhausting effort. She texts because silence feels like abandonment. She over-explains because being misunderstood feels like rejection. She apologizes, even when she has done nothing wrong, because conflict feels like the beginning of the end. And she has learned, somewhere deep in the part of her that fear built, that she must manage other people's emotional states before they manage hers. She gives and gives and gives, her time, her energy, her patience, her softness, her presence, not always because she wants to, but because the alternative, the terrifying open space of doing nothing and simply waiting to see what happens, is more than her nervous system knows how to hold. She does all of this from love, real love. I need you to hear that without using it as a reason to stop reading. But love filtered through anxiety does not behave like love. It behaves like fear. And fear, when it drives a relationship, never creates the closeness it is desperately reaching for. Let me show you what her day looks like. Not because it will be identical to yours, but because some corner of it will feel uncomfortably familiar. She wakes up, and the first thing she does, before she is fully conscious, before she has spoken a word or taken a breath that belongs entirely to herself, is reach for her phone. She is not checking the time. She is checking for him. Has he responded? Has something shifted overnight? Is there a message that will tell her, for at least the next few hours, that things are fine, that she is fine, that they are fine, that the low hum of dread she carries everywhere has no real object? If there is a message, she relaxes, temporarily. The relief lasts maybe an hour before the next wave of uncertainty arrives and the monitoring resumes. If there is no message, the day becomes quietly organized around the absence of it. Every thought slightly colored by the question of why. Every conversation slightly distracted by the background noise of a situation she cannot fully resolve. She is, in the most precise psychological sense of the word, preoccupied. Not by him exactly, by the uncertainty of him, by the open loop of not knowing that her nervous system cannot file away and forget. She would describe it as caring deeply, and she does care deeply. But caring deeply and being unable to tolerate uncertainty are not the same thing, even though in her experience, they have always arrived together. By midday, she has drafted and deleted a message twice. The first draft was too eager. The second was too casual in a way that felt performed. She puts the phone down, picks it up again, tells herself she is done overthinking. Thinks about it for another 40 minutes. Finally sends something light and easy. The third or fourth version of a text that began as something real and got edited into near nothingness by the time it left her hands. He responds hours later, briefly. She spends 20 minutes analyzing the brevity. This is not a portrait of a woman without intelligence. This is a portrait of a woman whose intelligence has been entirely conscripted by anxiety. Redirected from her own life, her own desires, her own extraordinary capacity for depth, and aimed with exhausting precision at managing the emotional temperature of someone else. Here is the psychological machinery beneath all of it, because the behavior only makes sense once you understand the belief that drives it. The anxious pursuer operates, usually without knowing it, from a foundational equation that was written in childhood and has never been fully revised. The equation goes like this: my worth is demonstrated through my effort. Love, in the emotional environment where she learned it, was not freely given. It was earned through performance, through compliance, through making herself useful enough, easy enough, good enough to justify continued affection. So she learned to work for love, relentlessly, creatively, with a dedication that, applied elsewhere, would be extraordinary. And then she grew up and carried that equation into every relationship she ever had, never quite realizing that she was not responding to the present moment, but to the ghost of an old one. That the man in front of her was not the parent who withheld. That the silence was not the prelude to abandonment she learned to dread. That she had the option, now, of responding differently. If only she could locate the part of herself that wasn't still 7 years old, waiting to find out if today would be a day she was loved. That part is running more of her choices than she knows. The cruelest loop in all of this, the one that makes it so difficult to exit, is that the behavior occasionally works. Not in the way that matters, not in a way that creates lasting security, but in the short-term chemical way of temporary relief. She overtexts and he responds, and for a moment the anxiety quiets. She overgives and he appreciates it, and for a moment she feels secure. She apologizes for something that wasn't her fault, and the tension dissolves. And for a moment the relationship feels stable. And so the brain learns, this works, file it, repeat it, except it doesn't work. Not really. Because each time she resolves her anxiety through pursuit, she confirms to herself that the anxiety was warranted, that without her effort, connection would collapse. She deepens the groove of the pattern. She makes it more automatic, more unconscious, more difficult to interrupt the next time the familiar dread arrives. She is not weak, she is trained. There is a profound difference, but trained patterns can be unlearned. That is also true. And it begins not with a new strategy, not with a rule about texting or a script for how to play it cool, but with something far more foundational and far more frightening. It begins with the moment she decides to sit inside the uncertainty and not move, to feel the pull toward the phone and not reach for it, to let the silence be silence without filling it with herself, to discover in that held breath of not doing whether the fear she has been running from her entire life is actually as lethal as it has always felt. She will find, when she finally stops moving long enough to look, that it is not. That she does not dissolve without constant effort. That she does not become invisible when she stops performing. That she is in the stillness she has always avoided, not empty, but full. Full in ways she has never had the chance to discover, because she has been too busy managing everyone else's experience of her to have her own. That discovery does not come easily. It does not come quickly. It will feel like withdrawal before it feels like freedom, because every pattern does. The anxiety will get louder before it gets quieter. The pull toward old behavior will be almost physical, almost gravitational in its insistence. But on the other side of it is something she has not felt in a very long time. Herself, unedited, unhurried. not waiting for permission to take up space, just there. Finally, completely there. And that woman, the one who has stopped chasing long enough to discover she had somewhere worth being all along, is not someone any version of anxiety could have led her to. She had to stop running first. The question is whether she is ready. Chapter 6. The Surrender Trap. When giving everything loses everything, you gave everything, and it still wasn't enough. That sentence lives in the body differently than it lives on the page. It is not just a thought, it is a specific physical weight. The kind that settles somewhere behind the sternum and refuses to fully lift even long after the relationship is ended, even after you have rebuilt and moved forward and told yourself, convincingly enough to almost believe it, that you are fine now, that you have learned, that you understand what went wrong. But do you, really? Because the story most women tell themselves about overgiving is a story about quantity. They gave too much. They loved too hard. They were too generous, too patient, too devoted, and the lesson they extracted is that next time they will give less. They will protect themselves more carefully. They will not repeat the same mistake. But the quantity was never the problem. You can give enormously, breathtakingly, and have it received with equal depth and gratitude. The women who love completely and are loved completely back are not giving less than you did. Some of them are giving more. The difference is not the amount. It is the foundation it was offered on. And that is the truth. This chapter is going to walk you toward slowly, because it requires a kind of honesty that most people spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. Here is the paradox that sits at the center of everything. The more you give to someone who has not yet fully chosen you, the less valuable your giving becomes. This is not a moral statement. It is a psychological one, and it operates completely independently of your intentions, your worth, or the genuine beauty of what you are offering. It is as impersonal as gravity. It does not care how good your heart is. It does not care how much you deserved reciprocation. It functions according to a principle so deeply embedded in human psychology that it shapes behavior at levels far beneath conscious awareness. We assign value based on scarcity. We assign worth based on what is not freely, endlessly, unconditionally available. This is not a flaw in human character. It is the architecture of how desire works. How it has always worked, long before modern relationships made it complicated. When something is abundant, the mind relaxes around it. It stops treating the thing with urgency. It takes it, consumes it, appreciates it in the mild background way. We appreciate things we know will still be there tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. There is no hunger because there is no scarcity, and without hunger there is no pursuit. Without pursuit there is no real desire, only comfort, only habit, only the pleasant but entirely flat experience of having without wanting. You became, without realizing it, someone's comfort. And comfort, while not nothing, while containing its own quiet value, is not the same as desire. It does not make someone reach for their phone at midnight. It does not make someone rearrange their plans. It does not make someone feel, in the marrow of them, that losing you would be a specific and irreplaceable loss. It makes them feel safe, settled, slightly less careful. And slightly less careful is precisely the problem. I want you to see something now that will be uncomfortable to look at directly. Think about the relationship where you gave the most. The one where you were, by any measure, extraordinary in your devotion. You showed up. You supported. You absorbed difficult moods without complaint. You made yourself available at inconvenient hours. You rearranged your life in small ways, and then larger ways to accommodate someone who, looking back, was never quite as rearranged by you as you were by them. In that relationship, who was doing most of the emotional labor? Who was tracking the health of the dynamic? Who was managing conflict, smoothing tension, noticing when something was off and taking steps to address it? Who was doing the invisible, unacknowledged work of keeping connection alive? You already know the answer. That is not a question that requires much reflection. Now here is the harder one. Did all of that giving make him more devoted? Did it make him more present, more attentive, more invested in your happiness? Did your extraordinary generosity produce the extraordinary reciprocity it deserved? Or did it produce something quieter and more disorienting? A man who received everything you offered while somehow, inexplicably seeming to need you less, who was appreciative, perhaps even genuinely grateful, but whose appreciation had a particular flatness to it. The flatness of someone who does not lie awake wondering if they are loved. Because the evidence of being loved arrives so constantly, so reliably, so entirely without effort on their part, that the question never even arises. The question of "am I loved?" only lives in the body as something urgent when the answer is genuinely uncertain. You removed all uncertainty, and in doing so you removed his need to reach. The surrender trap is this: you give everything in response to the fear of losing, and the giving itself creates the conditions for exactly the loss you were afraid of. It is not a conscious process on his side. This is important to understand, because the narrative that he was exploiting your generosity, that he deliberately took what you gave while knowing he would never match it, that narrative is almost always false, and it lets you off the hook from understanding the actual dynamic. Most men who receive overgiving are not cynical. They are simply responding, below the level of choice, to a psychological reality they did not create and could not name. When someone gives unconditionally, before commitment, before he has fully decided, before the relationship has built the mutual investment that gives giving its context, the human brain does not respond with proportional gratitude. It responds with something closer to adjustment. It recalibrates its baseline. It decides quietly and without announcement that this level of care is simply what is available here. And then it stops assigning it special significance. You worked incredibly hard to be irreplaceable. And the working itself, the visible, effortful, unconditional quality of it, made you easy to take for granted. Now I want to go somewhere darker with this, because there is a layer beneath the psychology of overgiving that is rarely examined, and it is the layer where the real wound lives. Why did you give so much so soon to someone who had not yet shown you they could hold it? Not how did it happen. You already understand the mechanics. But why in the deepest sense? What were you hoping beneath the surface of generosity that all that giving would secure? For most women who overgive, the honest answer, the one that takes real courage to stay with, is this: they were trying to make themselves indispensable, not out of manipulation, out of terror. The terror of being seen without the giving, of being encountered in plain form, without the impressive devotion, without the extraordinary availability, without the evidence of their worth rendered in constant acts of love, and found insufficient. The giving was not just generosity, it was argument. Look at how much I give. Look at how good I am at this. Look at how devoted I am. Surely this is enough. Surely this proves it. Surely no one could receive all of this and still choose to leave. But the argument was made to someone who didn't know a trial was taking place, and the verdict, when it came in whatever form it came, felt catastrophically unjust, because you had given everything. You had made the strongest possible case. And still, the problem was never that you were insufficient. The problem was that you were trying to prove sufficiency rather than simply being it. And those two things do not feel the same to the person receiving them, even if they cannot explain why. Proof of worth has a faint smell of desperation underneath the love. Real worth does not announce itself. It simply exists, steady, unhurried, completely unbothered by whether or not it has been adequately recognized. The woman who gives from wholeness gives differently than the woman who gives from fear. The woman who gives from wholeness does not give everything, not because she is withholding, but because she has a self that she keeps, a core that remains hers, that does not get poured into another person however much she loves them, that stays intact and full and recognizably her regardless of what is or is not reciprocated. That woman cannot be taken for granted, not because she is guarded, but because she is whole. And wholeness has a gravity that overgiving, despite all its beauty and sincerity, fundamentally lacks. Your generosity was never the problem. You were not wrong to love deeply. You were not wrong to show up fully. You were not wrong to want to give someone the kind of love you yourself had always wanted to receive. You were wrong only about the timing and about the foundation. You gave a finished house to someone who was still deciding whether to move into the neighborhood, and then stood in the doorway, confused and heartbroken, wondering why they didn't seem to appreciate having a home. They didn't appreciate it because they hadn't chosen it yet. And what is handed to us before we choose, it rarely becomes what we value most. The most important question you can sit with now is not how do I give less? Giving less is not the answer. Protecting yourself through withholding is just another form of fear, dressed differently. The question is, what would it mean to give from fullness instead of from fear? To offer, not because you are afraid of what happens if you don't, but because you are so genuinely overflowing that giving is simply the natural expression of who you are, with no desperation underneath it, no hidden argument, no proof being made. That kind of giving cannot be taken for granted. Because it comes from a woman who would be complete without him. And a man cannot take for granted a woman whose wholeness does not depend on him. He can only try, with increasing urgency, to be worthy of it. Chapter 7. Your wounds are running the show. You think you are making choices. That is the illusion this chapter is going to dismantle. Carefully, completely, and without the mercy of a softer version of the truth. Because the belief that you are consciously directing your behavior in relationships, that your patterns are the result of considered decisions made by an adult woman who knows what she wants and responds accordingly. That belief is one of the most expensive fictions you carry. You are not, in your most triggered moments, an adult woman making choices. You are a child running a program. And the program was written so long ago, in a language so foundational to your understanding of love and worth and safety, that you have never once experienced it as a program. You have experienced it as reality, as simply the way things are, the way people are, the way love feels and what it requires and what it costs. The water you swim in so completely that the concept of water itself has never quite occurred to you, until now. Let me ask you something, and I need you to resist the urge to answer quickly. Sit with it. Let it move through you before you reach for a response. When you trace your relationship patterns, not the surface behaviors, but the emotional texture underneath them, the specific quality of fear that arrives when someone goes quiet, the particular ache of feeling like you are too much or not enough, the way you contort yourself in certain moments to avoid a specific kind of rejection. When you trace all of that backward, past your last relationship and the one before it and the one before that, where does the feeling actually begin? Not with him, not with any of them. It begins in a room much smaller than the ones you have been examining. A childhood bedroom, perhaps? A dinner table with a specific emotional climate. A parent whose love was present, but somehow never quite landing. Or worse, a parent whose love was conditional in ways that were never stated directly, but were communicated in 1,000 invisible ways that your nervous system understood completely, even if your child's mind had no framework to process them. You learned what love was from the first people who were supposed to show you. And whatever they showed you, however imperfect, however incomplete, however laced with their own unexamined wounds, became your template, your baseline. Your unconscious definition of what intimacy feels like. And here is the part that requires you to stay very still. If what you were shown was inconsistent, you learned that love is unstable. If what you were shown was conditional, you learned that love must be earned. If what you were shown was absent, if the person who was supposed to see you most clearly was emotionally unavailable, physically gone, or simply too consumed by their own pain to offer you the steady, unconditional presence a child requires, then you learned something even more foundational and even more damaging. You learned that you are not enough to make someone stay. That belief, I am not enough to make someone stay, does not announce itself. It does not arrive in your adult relationships wearing a name tag. It comes disguised. It comes as the compulsion to reach for your phone when someone goes quiet for too long. As the inability to tolerate uncertainty in a relationship without immediately moving to resolve it. As the pattern of choosing people who are emotionally unavailable, not despite the unavailability, but on some level beneath awareness because of it. Because unavailability is familiar. And the brain, which prizes prediction above almost everything else, will consistently choose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar possibility of something different. The familiar pain, at least, is a pain it knows how to survive. It has survived it before. It has an entire infrastructure built around surviving it. The coping mechanisms, the rationalizations, the extraordinary capacity for hope in the face of evidence that hope is not warranted. The unfamiliar possibility of being fully loved, of being chosen without having to earn it. of resting inside a relationship without the constant vigilance of waiting for things to fall apart. That is genuinely threatening to a nervous system organized around instability. It does not feel like safety. It feels like danger wearing a pleasant disguise. This is why self-aware women who have done the work, who understand their patterns intellectually with painful clarity, still find themselves in the same dynamics, over and over with different faces. Understanding the wound has not healed it, and an unhealed wound does not wait for permission to run the show. It simply runs it. I want to give you a specific portrait now, not to be cruel, but because the abstract becomes real only when it has a face. She grew up with a father who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere. He was not a villain. He was a man consumed by his own weight, his work, his worries, his own unfulfilled interior life. And the particular way he showed love was through provision, through practical care, through being there without ever being quite reachable. She spent her childhood doing what children do when a parent is emotionally distant. She performed. She was excellent at school, at being easy, at being the child who needed nothing so that she would not add to the weight she sensed he was already carrying. She learned to read his moods before he was aware of them himself, to adjust her presentation based on the emotional weather of the room, to make herself small in the moments when smallness felt like the safest shape to take. She told herself she was independent, self-sufficient, that she didn't need much. And then she fell in love for the first time with a man who reminded her, in ways she could not have articulated, of the original inaccessibility. Not in his character, perhaps, but in the specific emotional texture he produced in her. The reaching, the uncertainty, the feeling of working for something that was not quite fully given, the exquisite, terrible familiarity of almost but not quite. She called it chemistry, she called it intensity, she called it a connection she had never felt before. She was not wrong that she had never felt it before. Not like this. Not with this particular resonance. What she did not know, what no one had ever told her, was that the intensity was not connection. It was recognition. Her nervous system encountering a dynamic it had been trained in since childhood, and lighting up with the deep, visceral hum of this is what love feels like. Even though it wasn't love, it was the echo of an old wound calling itself by love's name. Here is where it gets darker, and I need you to stay with me through this. The reason these patterns are so extraordinarily difficult to break is not lack of intelligence. It is not lack of self-awareness. It is not even lack of effort. It is that the wound operates from a level of the nervous system where conscious intention simply does not have full authority. You can know in your most rational and articulate self that the dynamic is unhealthy. You can have read every book, completed every exercise, sat in every therapy session with genuine commitment and real insight. You can be able to explain in precise psychological language exactly what you are doing and why. And then someone you are drawn to pulls back slightly and your body responds before your mind has formed a single thought. The chest tightens, the monitoring begins. The pull toward the phone arrives like a reflex, because it is a reflex. A response to a threat cue so deeply embedded that it bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely and arrives already formed, already urgent, already wearing the face of love. You did not choose that response. You were built for it, by experiences that happened to a person too young and too dependent to respond any other way. That is not weakness. That is the architecture of survival. But here is what survival architecture was never designed for. It was not designed to create intimacy. It was not designed to attract what you actually want. It was designed to manage a specific set of conditions that no longer exist, to navigate a childhood terrain that you have long since left, with tools that were forged for that specific climate, and have been carried, unexamined, into every landscape since. You are still using emergency equipment in a situation that no longer requires emergency measures. And the first step, not the only step, but the first one, is the act of recognition. Not the intellectual recognition you may have already had. Something older and more physical than that. The recognition that happens in the body, in the precise moment when the pattern activates, and you are able to pause, just briefly, and name what is actually happening. This is not the present. This is the past, wearing the present as a costume. This is not a real emergency. This is a nervous system running a program it no longer needs. That pause, that fraction of a moment between the trigger and the automatic response, is not nothing. It is in fact everything. Because in that pause lives the only kind of choice that actually matters. Not the choice to feel differently than you feel, but the choice to act differently than the wound would have you act. Your wounds are not your fault, but they are, from this moment forward, your responsibility. Not because you deserve the burden of what was done to you, or not done for you, in a childhood you did not choose, but because no one else can carry this particular piece of work. No relationship will heal it. No amount of being loved by someone else will reach the part of you that learned, before you had words for the learning, that you were not quite enough to be fully chosen. Only you can go back to that room. Only you can sit with the child who made herself small to make love feel safer, and tell her, not once but 1,000 times, until the body finally believes it, you were always enough. The problem was never you. What happens after that telling, who you become in relationships once the wound stops running them, is what the rest of this book exists to show you. But you cannot get there without first coming here. And here requires looking at something most people spend their entire lives successfully avoiding: the face of the original wound. Not to live in it, not to be destroyed by it, but to finally, fully, stop letting it drive. Chapter 8. The Dark Feminine. What they told you to fear about yourself. They were afraid of you before you were afraid of yourself. That is where this begins. Not with your inadequacy, not with your darkness, not with the parts of you that were too much or too intense or too something, but with the simple, historically verifiable fact that the qualities now living in you as shame were once living in you as power. And someone somewhere in the long chain of transmission that runs from culture to family to the voice inside your own head decided that power needed to be contained. So they gave it a different name. Your intensity became too much. Your standards became difficult. Your refusal to accept less than you deserved became high maintenance. Your depth, that vast, layered, complex interior world that most people will never be equipped to fully navigate, became overwhelming. Your hunger for real connection, for love that was not performance and intimacy that was not transaction, became needy. They rebranded your power as your problem. And the cruelest part, the part that required the most sophisticated operation, is that they got you to do it to yourself. Think about the last time you silenced something real in yourself to preserve the comfort of a room. Not a dramatic silencing, not a confrontation you avoided, or an opinion you swallowed in the face of obvious hostility. Something subtler than that. A feeling you noticed and immediately filed away. A standard you held privately, but never voiced. A moment when something in you rose up with a clear and specific no, and you translated that no, in real time, into something softer, something more palatable, something that would not disturb the atmosphere. You probably did not experience that translation as self-betrayal. You experienced it as maturity, as social intelligence, as being the kind of woman who doesn't create unnecessary drama, who understands that relationships require compromise, that not every feeling needs an audience, that the ability to regulate yourself in difficult moments is a sign of emotional sophistication. And some of that is true. Genuine emotional sophistication does exist. Discernment about when and how to express difficult feelings is genuinely valuable. But there is a point, and you have crossed it repeatedly, possibly for so long that you have lost track of where it is. Where self-regulation becomes self-erasure, where the editing becomes so automatic, so total, so woven into the fabric of how you move through the world that you are no longer choosing which parts of yourself to express. You have simply stopped having access to the others. The dark feminine is what lives on the other side of that erasure. I need to be precise about what I mean, because this concept has been distorted by both those who fear it and those who romanticize it. The dark feminine is not cruelty. It is not manipulation. It is not coldness deployed as a weapon, or emotional unavailability performed as strength, or the deliberate wounding of people who dare to love you. It is none of those things. It is at its most essential, the part of a woman that is untamed by other people's comfort, the part that knows its own value without requiring external confirmation, the part that can sit in a room where she is not being fully seen and feel. Not desperate to be recognized, not compelled to perform her worth, not shrinking to make the discomfort more manageable, but simply, quietly, unimpressed by the limitation of the room. It is the part of you that has standards not as a strategy, but as a lived expression of self-respect so deep it has become structural. The part that can say this is not enough for me without needing to justify the statement, defend it, soften it, or apologize for the inconvenience of having needs in the first place. It is the part that was called too much and was right all along. Here is what was actually happening. Every time someone told you that you were too intense, too deep, too particular about what you wanted from love, they were not describing your excess. They were describing their own limitation. An intense woman is uncomfortable to be around if you are not capable of depth yourself. A woman with real standards is threatening to encounter if you are accustomed to women who will accept whatever is offered. A woman who does not perform for approval, who is warm but not desperate, present but not consumed, interested but not orbiting, produces a specific kind of disorientation in people who have only ever encountered women who could be managed. You were not too much. You were too much for them. And that is an entirely different sentence. The world taught you to read your own intensity as a defect requiring correction. What it was actually doing, what it has always done with female power that refuses to be domesticated, is asking you to make yourself smaller so that the people around you would not have to grow larger. You complied. Most women do. The social pressure to comply is not subtle. It begins early, and it is relentless, and it comes from sources you love and trust. Parents who worried you would be too much for the world, partners who needed you more manageable, friendships that were more comfortable when you stayed in your assigned register. A culture that has one narrow template for female desirability and punishes everything that falls outside it. So you compressed, you edited, you learned to introduce yourself in the smaller version first, to let the larger version out carefully, cautiously, in controlled doses, always watching for the signal that you had gone too far, that the real you was beginning to show, and that this was a problem requiring immediate correction. You became, over years of practice, extraordinarily skilled at being almost yourself. The psychological cost of this is specific and rarely named. When you spend enough years suppressing the dark feminine, the depth, the standards, the refusal to perform, the hunger for something real, it does not disappear. It goes underground, and underground it transforms. What was once power becomes distortion. The intensity that was never allowed a clean expression finds other channels. It becomes anxiety, or a low-grade depression without clear cause, or a persistent sense that your relationships are somehow never reaching the depth you know is possible, or that you are always slightly performing even in your most intimate moments. You feel it as something wrong with you. It is not wrong with you. It is you. Misdirected, pressurized, looking for any available exit because the legitimate ones were sealed off so long ago you can barely remember they existed. There is a particular kind of man, and this matters, who is not threatened by the dark feminine, who does not need you to be smaller to feel comfortable, who encounters your intensity and does not recoil but leans in, who hears the standard you hold and does not experience it as an attack, but as information. Information about what it would mean to be genuinely worthy of you, which to a man of genuine substance is not a threat, but an invitation. That man is not interested in the edited version. He cannot be reached by her. She is too smooth, too accommodating, too carefully constructed to produce the specific friction that real intimacy requires. He has encountered women like her before, pleasant, agreeable, effortlessly easy to be with, and felt beneath the pleasantness, the particular loneliness of being with someone who is not quite there. What pulls him? What stops him? What makes him look twice? What makes him think about you in the specific, involuntary, middle-of-the-night way that signals something real has been encountered? Is the dark feminine, the depth, the quality of presence that does not need to be confirmed by his attention. The sense that behind what she has shown him, there are chambers he has not yet been given access to, and that access is not guaranteed, and that the question of whether he will earn it is genuinely, thrillingly open. You cannot produce that with strategy. You can only produce it by becoming it, by allowing back into full expression the parts of yourself that were compressed into silence. By deciding, not once but every day, in small and significant moments, that your comfort in your own fullness matters more than other people's comfort with your containment. Here is what no one will tell you directly, so I will. The world does not need another woman who has successfully made herself palatable. There is no shortage of women who have learned, with impressive dedication, to be easy to be around, to want the right amount, feel the right amount, need the right amount, to clip their edges and round their corners and present themselves in a form that asks nothing difficult from the people who encounter them. The world is overfull of that woman. She is everywhere. She is unremarkable not because she is insufficient, but because she is familiar. What is rare, genuinely, almost alarmingly rare, is a woman who has kept herself whole, who moves through the world in full possession of her depth, her standards, her fire, her refusal to be managed down into a more convenient size, who does not soothe other people's discomfort with her own diminishment, who can be soft and powerful, warm and uncompromising, fully present and not remotely available to be taken for granted. That woman is not easy to be around if you are not ready for her. She is absolutely impossible to forget. You have been taught to see your darkness as the thing that has been keeping love away, the truth, the one this entire chapter has been building toward, the one that may take time to fully land, is that your darkness, properly understood and finally reclaimed, is the thing that has always made you worth finding. The intensity they told you was too much. The depth they said was overwhelming. The standards they called unrealistic. The refusal to settle they labeled as difficult. All of it. Every quality that was handed back to you as a problem. That is the architecture of your magnetism. And the only question left, the one that will carry you into the next chapter of this book and the next chapter of your life, is whether you are finally, after all this time, ready to stop apologizing for being exactly what you are. Chapter 9. Desire begins at your border. The seduction of boundaries. The most seductive thing you will ever say to a man is no. Not performed coldness. Not strategic withdrawal calculated to manufacture interest. Not the manipulative silence of a woman playing games she learned from a bad article. A real no. A grounded, unhurried, completely unashamed no that comes from so deep inside your sense of self that it requires no explanation, no apology, and no permission from the person receiving. That no, the one spoken without flinching, without immediately softening it with reassurance, without watching his face to see if it has damaged something, is one of the most disorienting and irresistible things a woman can offer. Not because it is a trick, but because it is the clearest possible signal of something that has become genuinely rare. A woman who knows where she ends and someone else begins. A woman who has not dissolved herself into availability. Who has not traded her standards for the temporary relief of being chosen. Who carries herself with the quiet, unperformative certainty of someone who has already decided. Long before this conversation, long before this relationship, long before this specific moment of testing, what she will and will not accept. That woman is not cold. She is not difficult. She is not playing games. She is simply whole, and wholeness, in a world full of women who have learned to be endlessly accommodating, is so rare it reads as almost supernatural. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When is the last time you said no, cleanly, completely, without immediately offering a compensatory yes somewhere else, to someone you were romantically interested in? Not a no to something egregious. Not a no to something so obviously unacceptable that refusing required no courage. A no to something small. A plan that didn't work for you. A dynamic that felt slightly off. A request that was reasonable on the surface, but that something quiet and certain inside you knew was not right for you. A moment where your genuine preference and his expectation were not aligned, and you chose your genuine preference anyway, without panic, without excessive explanation, without spending the next 3 hours wondering if you had damaged something irreparable. Take a moment with that. Really look at it. For most women, the honest answer is uncomfortable, because most women who have been raised in the architecture of accommodation, who learned early that their lovability was linked to their agreeableness, that their value in a relationship was partly determined by how little difficulty they created, do not experience the small no as a simple act of self-respect. They experience it as a threat, to the relationship, to how they are perceived, to the fragile and precious thing they are always working to maintain. The no feels like a crack in something that must be kept smooth, and the instinct is immediate and physical. Smooth it over, fill it in, follow the no with enough warmth and reassurance that the other person never actually feels its edges. So the no becomes a yes with an apology attached. Or a maybe. Or a, of course, whatever works for you that costs you something you pretend not to notice paying. And you do this, let me be precise here, not because you are weak. You do it because you have been taught in ways so early and so thorough that they feel like your own beliefs, that the cost of a no is higher than the cost of a yes you didn't mean. Here is what that teaching has actually cost you. Every yes you gave from fear rather than genuine desire trained the people around you to expect an infinite yes. Every time you smoothed over a no before it could fully form, you communicated, not in words but in the language the nervous system actually reads, that your preferences are negotiable, that your comfort is secondary, that the maintenance of the other person's ease is a higher priority than the maintenance of your own integrity. And people respond to that communication accordingly. Not cruelly, usually, not consciously, but they stop asking whether something works for you. They stop wondering if you are fully comfortable. They stop treating your needs as something requiring active consideration, because you have demonstrated reliably and repeatedly that you will accommodate whatever is needed, that the accommodation will come. That you are, in the most literal psychological sense, a person without a border. And a person without a border is not someone you are drawn toward with urgency and desire. They are someone you move through, someone whose space you occupy without resistance, without the productive friction that creates genuine intimacy, without the specific and necessary experience of encountering another person who is actually there, who has weight and edges and a self that does not simply reorganize itself around your presence. You cannot desire what offers no resistance. This is not a preference, it is a law. The psychology of boundaries and attraction is something almost no one explains clearly, so let me try. And value, genuine, felt in the body value, not intellectually assigned worth, but the kind of value that produces urgency in pursuit and the specific electricity of wanting, is almost always linked to some form of scarcity or difficulty of access. We do not desperately want what is always and immediately available to us. We want what we are not certain we can have. We want what requires something of us to obtain. We want what has the capacity to be withheld, not arbitrarily, not manipulatively, but because it belongs to someone who actually owns it and has the self-possession to decide when and whether to offer it. Your yes, freely given, reflexively offered, stripped of any genuine deliberation, is not experienced as generosity by the person receiving it. It is experienced as the absence of an obstacle, and the absence of an obstacle does not produce desire. It produces comfort, ease. A relationship that feels pleasant and costs nothing and means, therefore, approximately nothing. The no, offered with grace, without hostility, without the anxious need to immediately repair the momentary discomfort it creates, is the obstacle. Not because you are trying to be difficult, but because you are telling the truth about what works for you. And a person who tells the truth about what works for them, consistently and without guilt, is a person who is in possession of something that cannot simply be assumed or taken. A person with a self that must be chosen, not just occupied. Now let me show you what this looks like in the body of a real moment. Because theory without sensation is just information, and what you need is something you can feel. A man you are seeing makes a plan without checking with you first. It is not a dramatic violation. It is small. But it is the third or fourth time the small thing has happened. And each time it has happened, you have found a way to make it fine, to adjust, to tell yourself flexibility is a virtue. And this is not worth making a thing of. This time, something in you is tired of adjusting. The old pattern says, say nothing, accommodate, preserve the warmth. What the dark feminine, the part of you this book has been slowly reawakening, does instead is quiet. Still, she does not rage. She does not deliver a speech. She simply, with complete calm and no performance of hurt, says, that doesn't work for me. 4 words. No elaboration. No apology trailing behind them like an afterthought designed to soften the blow. No immediate pivot to suggesting an alternative, to filling the silence that follows with reassurance that she is not really difficult, not really demanding, not really the kind of woman who makes things hard. Just the sentence. Held complete. What happens in the room after those 4 words is, "And I need you to feel this," not disaster. It is a moment of recalibration, a moment where he encounters, possibly for the first time in this dynamic, a woman who did not automatically bend, and something in him, beneath the momentary surprise, beneath whatever small inconvenience the no has created, responds to that encounter not with resentment, but with a specific quality of heightened attention. Because she just became slightly less certain, slightly less fully possessed. Slightly more someone to be reckoned with. That shift, that small, clean, unglamorous shift, is the beginning of every real dynamic that has ever existed between 2 people who genuinely desire each other. I want to go to the deeper layer now, the one that makes this chapter more than dating advice. The inability to hold a boundary is never, at its root, about the other person. It is about the woman's relationship with her own interior authority. Whether she trusts herself, whether she believes that what she perceives, the wrongness of something, the discomfort, the specific signal of "this is not okay for me," is real, valid, worthy of being acted upon even when acting upon it creates friction. Most women have been trained out of trusting their own perception. Not dramatically, not through overt gaslighting necessarily, though that happens too, but through the accumulated experience of being told in 1,000 subtle ways that their feelings are disproportionate. Their reactions are too much. Their no is inconvenient and probably an overreaction, and surely if they just think about it more calmly, they will see that the situation is actually fine, and the problem is the intensity of their response to it. You learn to doubt your own knowing, and when you doubt your knowing, you cannot hold a border. Because holding a border requires trusting that what you felt, that clear pre-verbal signal of "no, not this," was accurate, was real, was worth the discomfort of honoring. Reclaiming your boundaries is therefore not, at its deepest level, about learning to say no to other people. It is about learning to say yes to yourself, to your own perception, to the part of you that knew before your mind had caught up that something was not right. And that has been waiting patiently for you to stop overruling it in the name of keeping peace. A woman with real borders is not a fortress. She is not cold, not armored, not defended against connection. She is in fact more available to genuine intimacy than the woman who has no borders at all. Because the intimacy she offers is chosen, deliberate. She is not there because she cannot bear to be alone, or because the alternative felt too uncomfortable to hold. She is there because she decided to be there, and her decisions mean something, because she is capable of deciding otherwise. That is the seduction, not the no itself, but what the no reveals. A woman for whom yes is a genuine choice. A woman whose presence is not the path of least resistance, but a gift that could, without drama or cruelty, be given elsewhere. A woman you have to be worthy of. There is nothing more magnetic in the world, and there is nothing rarer. The question this chapter leaves inside you, the one that should feel like a small, sharp thing lodged somewhere important, is not "how do I learn to say no?" It is something older and more personal than that. It is, what have I been saying yes to for years that some quiet part of me has never stopped knowing was a no? And what would your life, your relationships, your self-respect, the specific quality of how you move through the world, look like if you finally, fully honored that knowing? That answer is not somewhere out there. It has been living inside you the entire time, waiting with remarkable patience for you to stop drowning it out. Chapter 10. The Art of Becoming Unreachable. Without going anywhere, you are right there, completely present. Physically in the room, emotionally engaged, visibly invested, and somehow impossibly slightly out of reach, not because you have withdrawn, not because you are performing distance or manufacturing unavailability through the cold calculus of someone who has read too many strategy guides and decided that being less responsive will make them want you more. None of that. You are here, warm, attentive, genuinely interested, and yet there is something about the quality of your presence that produces in the person across from you a specific and involuntary sensation, the sensation that they do not yet fully have you. that no matter how close they get, there is something further in, a depth that keeps receding as they approach, an interior life so genuinely rich, so actually inhabited, that even in moments of real closeness they are aware, not anxiously, but with the particular aliveness of someone reaching for something extraordinary, that the full version of you has not yet been reached. That quality is not a technique. It cannot be faked, not convincingly, not for long. It is the natural atmosphere produced by a woman who has cultivated, through genuine investment in her own becoming, an inner world that does not require another person to complete it. A woman who is so actually, fully, genuinely occupied with her own life, that even her stillness has texture, even her silence has content, even her most available moments carry within them the quiet signal that she exists beyond this conversation, beyond this relationship, beyond whatever version of her he has so far been given access to. That is what this chapter is about. Not how to seem that way, how to become it. First, let's look at what you have actually been doing, because this requires honesty that is mildly uncomfortable before it becomes clarifying. You have been waiting, not always obviously, not with your eyes fixed on the door or your phone face up on the table in a way that announces the waiting. The waiting is subtler than that, more internal, more thoroughly woven into the structure of your days, but it is there. Has been there in the soft background of your awareness through most of the relationships you have cared about. The sense that your life is slightly on pause, that the real version of things will begin when something external aligns, when he becomes more available, when the uncertainty resolves, when you finally know where this is going so that you can invest accordingly. In the meantime, you are ready. Available. Oriented toward the outcome you are hoping for. Monitoring the signals that will tell you whether hope is warranted, spending more cognitive and emotional resources on the dynamic than you would ever comfortably admit if someone asked you directly. You are present in the room, but the most alive part of you is elsewhere, in the future, in the uncertainty, in the endless processing of a situation that has not yet resolved itself. You are not inhabiting your own life, you are waiting for it. And the person you are waiting for can feel this, not consciously, not in a way they could articulate over dinner, but in the specific quality of your attention, the way it is too focused, too calibrated toward them, too clearly organized around their presence. They sense, beneath the warmth, the faint structural hum of someone who needs something from this, someone for whom the outcome of this particular dynamic carries more weight than any individual moment within it. That weight is what makes you reachable, fully, completely, in every direction reachable. And what is fully reachable cannot be pursued. Here is the psychological mechanism at work, because naming it clearly is the first step toward interrupting it. When your emotional center of gravity lives inside a relationship, when the primary source of your aliveness, your sense of possibility, your feeling that something real and important is happening, comes from the dynamic with another person rather than from your own life, you become, in the most precise sense, dependent on that dynamic for your vitality. And dependence, even when it is never stated, even when it is carefully concealed beneath competence and composure in the performance of a woman who has it together, radiates. It changes the quality of your presence. It makes your attention feel like something the other person is responsible for. It creates a subtle but real pressure. The pressure of being the primary source of someone else's inner weather, that even the most loving person will, eventually and inevitably, begin to feel as weight. They pull back slightly to breathe. You feel the pulling back and move closer to compensate. The dynamic tightens, the weight increases, the pulling back accelerates. You have been in this loop. You know exactly what it feels like from the inside, even if you have never had language for the mechanics of it. The exit from the loop is not distance. It is not withdrawal. It is not learning to care less or love less or invest less emotional energy in the people who matter to you. All of those are the wrong medicine for the actual diagnosis. The exit is fullness. A full woman is unreachable, not because she is unavailable, but because she is elsewhere, even when she is standing right in front of you. She is elsewhere in the sense that matters. Her life, her projects, her friendships, her interior world, her own becoming, are all genuinely, actively, non-performatively happening. They are not on pause. They are not waiting for external confirmation before they are allowed to proceed. They are alive, vivid, demanding her real attention. And that demand is not a burden she resents, but a wealth she inhabits. When she is with him, she is fully with him. She is not distracted, not half present, not monitoring the dynamic while pretending to be in the moment. She is there. Genuinely interested, genuinely warm, capable of real connection, real laughter, real depth. And then she goes home, and her life continues. And she does not spend the next 4 hours processing what he said or what he meant, or what his level of response to a particular moment indicates about the trajectory of the relationship. She does not, because she has somewhere else to be, inside her own world, which is interesting enough, full enough, genuinely alive enough to reclaim her attention the moment the date ends. That quality of returning to herself, naturally, without effort, without the need to manufacture it, is what makes her presence feel rare when she offers it. Her attention is not unlimited. Not because she is rationing it strategically, but because it genuinely has other places to be. You want to be wanted with urgency. Urgency requires scarcity. Genuine scarcity cannot be performed. It can only exist when the thing being wanted is actually, truly, not infinitely available. And the only way to become genuinely, non-manipulatively unavailable is to have a life that is full enough to make availability a real cost rather than a reflex. What does that life look like in practice? Not in the abstract, but in the specific texture of actual days. It looks like the creative project you have been postponing because the timing never feels right. Start it. Not when you feel inspired enough. Not when the relationship uncertainty has resolved itself. Not when life settles into the version of itself you keep waiting for it to become. Now, with all the mess and imperfection of now. It looks like the friendships you have been showing up to with half of yourself, receiving your full presence again. The conversations that have nothing to do with him. The dinners that regenerate something in you that no romantic relationship can quite reach. The specific quality of being known by people who have loved you through multiple versions of yourself and are not going anywhere. It looks like the interior life, the reading, the solitude, the thinking, the making of things, or the consuming of things that move you, treated not as a consolation prize for when relationship isn't providing enough stimulation, but as the primary architecture of who you are. The foundation, not the decoration. It looks like having an answer, a real and immediate one, to the question, what are you excited about right now? And having that answer be about your own life, your own work, your own becoming. Not about him, not about the relationship, about you. The deeper truth in all of this, the layer that will take time to fully metabolize, is that becoming unreachable is not something you do to attract someone. It is something you do because the alternative, the life of the waiting woman, the woman whose center of gravity lives in someone else's hands, is simply no longer a life you are willing to live. The magnetism that results is real. It is powerful. It will change how people pursue you, how they value you, how they experience the specific quality of being in your orbit. But that is not the point. Or rather, it is not the primary point. The primary point is this. Somewhere in the process of building a life so full that you cannot be entirely consumed by any single relationship within it, you will encounter something you have possibly never fully encountered before. Yourself. Unwaiting, unheld, in full, uninterrupted possession of your own attention. That the inner world you have been neglecting in favor of outer relationships is, when finally inhabited with real commitment, the most interesting place you have ever been. That the woman other people have been trying to reach was here the entire time, waiting with exquisite patience for you to stop waiting and come home to her instead. Chapter 11. Letting him come to you. The ancient art of feminine gravity. You have been pushing against something that was never meant to be pushed. Not because you are wrong to want, not because desire itself is the problem, or ambition, or the deep and legitimate hunger for love that moves like a current through everything you do. The wanting is not the wound. The wanting is human and real, and nothing about this chapter will ask you to stop feeling it. What this chapter asks, what it will require of you if you are willing to stay with it, is something far more difficult than wanting less. It asks you to want completely, fully, without apology or diminishment, and then to be still inside that wanting, to hold the full weight of your desire without immediately converting it into action, to feel the pull towards someone and not reach. Not because reaching is wrong, but because you are about to discover that the most powerful force available to you has never been your reach. It has always been your gravity, and gravity by its nature does not push. It does not chase. It does not extend itself toward the thing it wants to draw in. It simply is so dense, so genuinely present, so completely itself, that everything in its field is pulled toward it without the application of a single ounce of outward force. That is what you are learning to become. Not a woman who waits passively for life to arrive. A woman so fully inhabited, so genuinely whole, so completely in possession of her own center, that coming toward her feels to the right person, not like a choice, but like an inevitability. Let me name something you have probably never heard articulated directly, because it is one of the most disorienting truths about the way desire and pursuit actually work. Every time you reach towards someone before they have reached toward you, every time you initiate, follow up, make yourself available, remove the uncertainty, close the space, you are not only expressing desire, you are also simultaneously relieving him of the experience of his own desire. Read that again, slowly, because this is where everything changes. Desire in the body is an experience of tension, of wanting something that is not yet fully yours, of leaning towards something that has not yet fully leaned back. That tension, uncomfortable, electric, slightly maddening, is not a problem to be solved. It is the very substance of attraction. It is what makes someone think about you when you are not there. What makes them reach for their phone not to manage anxiety, but because something genuine and involuntary is pulling them toward connection with you. When you preemptively resolve that tension, when you reach before he has had the chance to register his own reaching, when you make contact before his own desire has built enough pressure to produce spontaneous movement toward you, you take something from him that he did not know he needed. The experience of wanting you. And a man who has never had the full, uninterrupted experience of wanting you, whose desire has always been met before it could fully form, whose reaching was always preempted by yours, that man does not know what he has. Not really. Not in the bone-deep way that produces the kind of devotion that doesn't require maintenance. He knows you are there. He knows you are warm and present and good. But he has never had the specific experience of reaching for you and finding you had not already moved to meet him. And that experience, that particular moment of his own genuine initiative and its reward, is what creates the feeling of having chosen you, not fallen into the comfortable ease of you. Actively, deliberately, with full awareness of the alternative, chosen you. You cannot give someone the experience of choosing you. It has to come from them. And it can only come from them if you have left the space for it. Genuinely, unhurriedly, without filling every available silence with the noise of your own anxiety. Here is where this becomes uncomfortable. And I need you to stay with it past the first instinct to defend yourself. Letting him come to you does not feel like power. Not at first. Not when you are sitting inside the uncertainty of not knowing, when the silence has stretched longer than is comfortable, when the voice that sounds like wisdom but is actually anxiety is telling you that initiative is the same as confidence, and waiting is the same as passivity, and a woman who knows what she wants goes after it rather than sitting still while it may or may not arrive. That voice is very convincing. It speaks in the language of self-respect. It wears the vocabulary of empowerment. It tells you that reaching is strength and stillness is fear, and it is lying to you with extraordinary fluency, because here is what the stillness actually requires. Not passivity. Not the hollow, anxious waiting of a woman whose life is on pause. Not the held breath of someone whose entire emotional equilibrium depends on how this particular situation resolves. It requires the hardest thing. A life so full, a sense of self so stable, an inner world so genuinely inhabited, that the uncertainty of whether he will reach does not destabilize you. Because your stability does not depend on his movement. You are not waiting to find out if you are worth reaching for. You already know the answer to that question. And the knowing is so deep and so settled that it does not require his confirmation to remain intact. That is the internal stillness this chapter is asking you to develop. Not the stillness of someone who has given up. The stillness of someone who is so completely at home in herself that she can afford to wait. Who can let the space be space? Who can let the silence be silence? Who can hold the uncertainty without collapsing it prematurely? Because she is not afraid of what the uncertainty might be saying about her worth. Her worth is not in question. It was never in question. The ancient quality this chapter is pointing toward has been called many things in many traditions: receptivity, feminine magnetism, grace. The particular power that lives not in doing but in being. It is old, far older than the modern conversation about dating and attraction that has produced so much noise and so little wisdom. It predates the self-help industry. It predates the cultural moment that told women that chasing was liberation. It is the recognition, carried in the body of every woman who has ever been genuinely, irresistibly magnetic, that her power does not flow outward. It flows inward, creating a center so strong, so densely real, so completely itself, that others are drawn toward it the way water is drawn toward depth. Think of the women throughout your life, or your imagination, your cultural inheritance, your own experience of being moved by someone, who have had this quality. The ones who are not the most obviously beautiful, not the most aggressively pursued, not the ones working hardest to be noticed. The ones who seem to exist in a slightly different atmospheric pressure. Who were warm but never desperate, present but never consumed. Who laughed from somewhere genuine and looked at you with the kind of attention that made you feel for a moment like the most interesting thing in the room, and then, without drama or performance, looked away and left you wanting to earn that look back. What they had is not a mystery. It is not a gift distributed arbitrarily to some women and withheld from others. It is the natural result of a specific and learnable internal orientation, the orientation of a woman who has turned toward her own life with the same quality of attention she used to direct outward toward the people she was hoping would choose her. Now let me give you the darker layer, the one that sits beneath the concept and makes it genuinely confronting. The reason letting him come to you is so difficult. The real reason, beneath the surface explanations about modern independence and feminist consciousness, and not wanting to seem like you're playing games, is that it requires you to tolerate the possibility that he might not come. And that possibility, that you could be fully, genuinely yourself, with all your depth and beauty and extraordinary capacity for love, and still not be chosen by this particular person, is a fear so fundamental that most women would rather preempt it than face it, would rather reach, initiate, make themselves maximally available and undeniably present, and risk the relationship dying through over-pursuit, than be still, be fully themselves, and risk the relationship never beginning because he didn't step forward. One risk produces the result through action. The other receives the result through truth, and truth, the clean, unmanipulated truth of whether someone is genuinely drawn toward the real you, in all your complexity, without being helped along by your anxiety, is the most terrifying and the most valuable information available in any early dynamic. Because a man who comes to you when you have not reached, who steps forward into the space you have left genuinely open, that man is not responding to your effort or your strategy or your impressive management of his experience of you. He is responding to you, to whatever it is in you that he encountered and could not stop thinking about, to the specific quality of your presence that produced in him, without assistance, the desire to be closer. That choosing is unambiguous. It is unmixed with obligation or the social momentum of a dynamic that was initiated by your pursuit. It is clean and clean choosing, the kind where you know with real certainty that the person across from you moved toward you of their own genuine volition, is the only kind that ever produces real security. Everything else is a foundation you built and now have to maintain. The art of feminine gravity is not learned in a day. It is not switched on by a decision, however sincere. It is cultivated through the slow, unglamorous, deeply important work of returning your primary attention to your own life, to your own becoming, to the development of an inner world so genuinely rich that it pulls you inward first, always before it reaches outward. And as that world deepens, as you become more genuinely, less performatively yourself, something shifts in how you exist in relation to others. The energy changes. The quality of your presence changes. The specific atmospheric pressure you create, simply by being in a room, changes. You become someone it is not immediately possible to have. Someone whose full attention must be arrived at rather than assumed. Someone whose warmth, when it is offered, carries the specific gravity of something that is not infinite, and is therefore genuinely worth something. The most beautiful thing about this is that it is not a technique. It has no opposite. It cannot be reversed by time or familiarity, or the inevitable revealing of your ordinary human complexity. Because it is not built on mystery for mystery's sake, or unavailability manufactured to produce effect. It is built on the most durable foundation that exists. A woman who is completely, unwaveringly at home in herself. And the question that should be sitting quietly inside you now, the one that will either disturb you or liberate you, depending on how ready you are, is simply this. When did you last feel completely at home in yourself? Not in a relationship, not in his presence, not in the temporary relief of being chosen, in yourself, alone, still, needing nothing from outside to confirm what you already know inside. If the answer requires searching, if the memory is distant or uncertain, or colored by the particular longing of someone who has spent years building homes in other people rather than in herself, then you know exactly where the real work begins. Chapter 12. She Who Does Not Chase. Living the Transformation. This is not the ending you were expecting. There is no arrival scene. No moment where everything clicks into perfect alignment and the version of you that has been fighting through these pages finally receives the external confirmation she has been working toward. No relationship that validates the journey. No man who appears precisely calibrated to your growth to reward you for the work you have done. That is not how real transformation works. And this book has been too honest with you to lie to you now, in the final pages, when the lie would be so easy and so comforting and so entirely beside the point. What actually happens, what is already happening whether you can feel it yet or not, is quieter than an arrival. It is more interior than a reward. It is the specific and unmistakable sensation of a woman who has been running for a very long time, finally stopping. Not because she has reached the destination, but because she has realized, with a clarity that lands in the body before it lands in the mind, that she was never being chased. She was chasing herself. Running toward a version of her life she could not inhabit because she was always too far ahead of it, always in the future, always in the outcome, always somewhere other than exactly here. She stops. She turns around. She looks at the life she was racing through. And for the first time, perhaps the first time in years, she actually sees it. But before we go there, I need to ask you one more uncomfortable question. The last one, and in some ways the hardest. Throughout this book, you have confronted the ways you shrink. The ways you overgive, over-explain, over-pursue. The wounds that have been running your choices. The armor that has been keeping you safe and simultaneously keeping you surface. The mystery you drained. The power you surrendered. The borders you failed to hold. The waiting that consumed you. You have sat with all of it. Perhaps with recognition so sharp it felt like being cut. Perhaps with the particular grief of seeing clearly something you can never unsee. But here is the question I have been waiting until now to ask. Because it required all of the previous chapters to create enough context for it to land with the weight it deserves. What are you going to do with the understanding if you don't change? Because understanding, without the daily, unglamorous, deeply uncomfortable work of actually living differently, is not transformation, it is information. And information, held without application, has a specific and predictable shelf life. It feels revolutionary for a few days, significant for a few weeks, and then the old grooves reassert themselves, quietly, convincingly, wearing the face of reasonableness, and you find yourself in the same patterns with a new person, wondering how you got here again when you know so much better now. Knowing better is not enough. It was never enough. The question has always been whether you are willing to be differently in the small moments, in the triggered moments, in the 2 a.m. moments when the old poll arrives, and your hand is moving toward the phone before your mind has had the chance to intervene. In those moments, not in the abstract, not in theory, not in the composed and reflective space of reading a book, but in those precise, physical, viscerally uncomfortable moments, who are you going to be? The woman this book has been building toward is not a finished product. She is not a destination you reach and then maintain without effort. She is a practice, a daily choosing. 1,000 small decisions made in the direction of the self you have been excavating from beneath the layers of compromise and performance and fear. She looks different than you might have imagined when you began reading. She is not cold, not armored. Not the kind of impressive that requires distance to maintain. She is in fact more open than the woman who started this journey. More genuinely available for real intimacy, more capable of real vulnerability, more willing to be fully seen. Because she is no longer using closeness as a strategy for securing love, she is afraid of losing. She offers herself from a place so fundamentally different from fear that the offering itself has a different quality, a different weight, a different effect on the people who receive it. She is warm without being consumed, present without being desperate, interested without being orbiting. She laughs from somewhere real. She speaks from somewhere real. Her no is clear and unhurried. Her yes is chosen and therefore means something. She does not monitor. She does not edit herself in real time based on how she is landing. She does not spend the drive home processing every moment of the evening. For evidence of how she is perceived, she goes home. She makes tea or pours wine, or sits in whatever silence she has created for herself in the life she has been building. The actual inhabited, genuinely interesting life she stopped putting on hold, and she is fine. Not fine in the hollow, covering something sense. Fine in the way of a woman whose stability does not depend on external weather. And here is the thing, the specific thing that is both ordinary and revolutionary. She is also sometimes not fine. She is sometimes uncertain, sometimes tender, sometimes caught off guard by feeling more than she expected. She is human, completely, unguardedly human. But her humanity does not frighten her anymore. She does not reach for the phone to manage it. She does not perform wellness she isn't feeling. She sits inside the feeling, whatever it is, however uncomfortable, with the patience of a woman who has learned, through everything this book has asked her to confront, that her emotional experience is not an emergency requiring immediate export. She can hold it. She is strong enough to hold it. Here is what changes in her relationships. Not all at once, not dramatically, but unmistakably over time, in ways that accumulate into something she could not have predicted from the beginning of this journey. The people who are drawn toward her self-respect stay. The people who were drawn toward her anxiety, who needed her to be slightly destabilized, slightly reaching, slightly more invested than them, find the new atmosphere uncomfortable and leave, or reduce themselves to a frequency she can finally recognize clearly enough to no longer mistake for intimacy. This is a form of loss. I will not pretend otherwise. Some of the people you have loved, some of the dynamics you have found intoxicating, will not survive your wholeness. Not because you have become less lovable, because you have become less manageable. And some people, faced with a woman who is genuinely in possession of herself, will discover they were never equipped for that particular encounter. Let them go. Not bitterly. Not with the performance of someone who has decided that self-respect requires cruelty. With the simple, clear-eyed recognition that what was not right for you was never going to become right, no matter how long you waited or how much you gave. The space they're leaving creates is not emptiness. It is room. Room for the people and experiences and versions of connection that can actually meet you where you now stand, which is somewhere more real, more grounded, more honest than where you were when this book began. The transformation is not an event. I need you to hear this clearly because the mind wants to locate it, wants to find the before and after, the watershed moment, the chapter or the conversation or the morning when everything shifted permanently. It does not work like that. It works like this. One day you notice that you didn't check your phone compulsively. One day you notice that his silence did not reorganize your entire inner weather. One day you say no, cleanly, without the apology trailing behind it. And you go home and you feel, beneath the small discomfort of having created friction, something you can only describe as integrity. The specific, quiet, almost imperceptible satisfaction of having told the truth about what you will and will not accept. One day you are in a conversation with someone you are interested in and you realize, mid-sentence, with a clarity that is almost disorienting, that you are not performing, not managing, not monitoring how you are landing. You are simply there, fully. unguarded in the specific way that is only possible when the foundation beneath you is stable enough that you do not need to white-knuckle the surface. One day, you look in the mirror, not metaphorically, but literally, in the ordinary light of an ordinary morning, and the woman looking back is not the edited version, not the carefully constructed presentation, not the face of someone who has spent years making herself acceptable. It is you, the full version, the one who was buried so gradually that the burial itself became invisible. And she is not what you were afraid she might be. Too much, too intense, too difficult, too broken to be worth the work of loving. She is extraordinary. She was always extraordinary. She who does not chase, does not stop wanting. She does not harden herself against desire or love, or the very human need for connection that runs beneath everything this book has examined. She does not become an island or a monument or an untouchable version of feminine perfection that no real relationship could survive. She simply reorients. She turns the quality of attention she was pouring outward, the fierce, devoted, extraordinary capacity for love that has always been her most powerful characteristic, and she turns it, first and finally, toward herself. Not instead of toward others, not as a permanent renunciation of external love, but as the foundation from which all of her loving going forward will be built. And from that foundation, from the specific unshakable stability of a woman who has done the work of coming home to herself, everything she touches carries a different quality. Her love is different, not smaller, richer, because it comes from fullness rather than from need. Her presence is different, not colder, denser, because it is entirely inhabited rather than half distributed between the moment and the monitoring. Her relationships are different, not easier necessarily, realer, because she can no longer be in a dynamic that requires her to disappear to sustain it. This is where the book ends, not with a prescription or a promise or a carefully packaged summary of the lessons you should carry forward, with a question, the last one, the one that contains everything. Knowing what you now know about the woman you have been and the woman you are capable of becoming, what are you still willing to settle for? Not in love, specifically. In everything? In how you are treated and how you treat yourself. In what you accept and what you refuse. In the size of the life you allow yourself to inhabit. In the distance between who you perform yourself to be and who you actually are. In the quiet, when no one is watching and nothing needs to be managed. That distance, whatever it currently is the last frontier. And the woman who closes it, slowly and unglamorously in one honest moment at a time, does not need a fairy tale ending. She has become something the fairy tale was always pointing toward and never quite reaching. The woman who is the story, not the one waiting to be chosen. The one who finally, irrevocably chose herself. You've made it to the end of this book, but you haven't finished. Not really. Because the woman reading these final words is not the same woman who read the first ones. Something has shifted, you can feel it. Maybe you can't fully name it yet, but something that was asleep has opened its eyes. Here is what I need you to understand before you close this page. The world will keep telling you to do more, give more, reach more. The noise will not stop. The old patterns will resurface, especially in moments of vulnerability. In moments when you like someone deeply and the fear of losing them makes your hand reach for that phone before your mind has time to say, wait. That pull is not weakness. It is the wound reminding you it is still healing. What you do with that pull, that is where your power lives. A woman who has not read this book will keep running the same loops. She will keep giving too soon, pursuing too hard, and wondering why the people she loves seem to value her less the more she offers. She will mistake exhaustion for love and call her anxiety passion. She will wait for someone to rescue her from a pattern she doesn't yet recognize as a pattern. But you see it now. And once you see it, you cannot go back to the version of yourself that didn't. That is both the gift and the burden of this kind of awakening. It asks something of you. It asks you to be patient when everything in you wants to chase. To be still when every wound you carry tells you to perform. To trust your gravity when you have spent years believing you are not enough to pull anyone in. You are enough. You have always been enough. The work now is to live like it. If something in these pages cracked something open for you, if you recognized yourself in a way that was uncomfortable or liberating or both, then this journey isn't over. Every woman who walks through this kind of truth deserves a community that understands it. Share this book with a woman who needs it. Leave your thoughts, your story, your moment of recognition. Because the most powerful thing a woman can do after waking up is refuse to let another woman stay asleep alone. The conversation continues. And so do you.